They came to her door in the dark, the way starving men come to anything that smells of yeast, and every one of them had cursed her name 3 months before. That is the part worth sitting with, not the bread, not the cold, but the particular silence of a man eating food made by hands he once refused to touch. By the time the pass opened in spring, 80 of them owed her their lives, and not one had the decency to be ashamed of it. But that comes later. In the beginning, there was only the wind, and the smell of it, tailings dust and pine smoke and something colder underneath, the smell of a mountain deciding whether to let a camp live through the winter. She came up the last grade on foot, leading a mule that had stopped caring about the incline miles back, and the men who saw her arrive would say later that she looked like a woman who had already buried more than she carried. She had a husband, 2 years gone, a farm in Missouri that had failed the way farms fail, slowly, then all at once. What she carried now fit in a wagon bed: 100 pounds of flour, a tin of salt, a jar of sourdough starter wrapped in wool like something newborn, and whatever was left of her patience for being told what she was worth. She did not know, walking in, that 3 days before her boots touched Blackwater Gulch, the mountain had opened its mouth and swallowed 4 men whole, and left a 5th marked for the rest of his life. She did not know this the way a stranger never knows the wound she is about to be blamed for. But camps do not need facts. They need a shape to put their grief into, and a heavy-set widow arriving the same week a tunnel came down was shape enough. They gave her the worst tent, out by the tailings, where the wind came unbroken, and the ground never quite thawed even at noon. The foreman who assigned it did not meet her eyes. Neither did most of the men, though a few watched her from a distance, the way men watch weather they don't trust. What she found, past the tent flap, past the frozen mud and the smell of char, was a cookhouse burned to its bones 6 weeks prior, beams like blackened ribs, ash gone soft with old rain, and in the wreck of it, half buried, a cast-iron oven split clean through with a crack a man could lay his thumb in. She stood over it a long while, the wind working at her skirts, her breath going up in a long white rope toward a sky already threatening more snow. She did not know yet that a scarred man was watching her from the tree line, the left side of his face marked by fire, saying nothing, already deciding something he would not say aloud for a long time yet. She knelt beside the ruined oven and put her bare hand to the crack, as if measuring a wound, as if the iron might tell her something about the men who had let it burn. The metal was cold enough to sting. She did not pull her hand away. There was a way of testing a thing broken to see what use remained in it, and she had learned that way over years she did not speak of, in a kitchen in Missouri that no longer existed, behind a husband who no longer existed either, in a life that had taught her that most things called ruined were only called that by people unwilling to do the work of mending them. The wind came harder as the light thinned. She gathered what iron scraps she could find in the wreckage: a grate, a door hinge still true, a length of pipe bent but whole, and carried them back to the tent in an apron she had folded into a sling, her arms trembling before she was halfway there, though she did not set the load down to rest. The men at the fire pit watched her pass. One spat into the dirt, another said something low to the man beside him, and the second man laughed the short laugh of someone agreeing without wanting to have said so. Inside the tent, she built a small fire in a ring of stones already blackened by some other hand, some earlier occupant who had also been given this ground and this wind. She unwrapped the jar of starter from its wool and held it to her chest a moment, the way a woman might hold something living, because in its way, it was. Missouri was 2,000 miles behind her, and 11 weeks of dwindling road, and this jar had crossed all of it, wrapped against her body at night, so the cold would not kill what her mother had given her, and her mother before that. She did not eat that night. She measured the flour instead, 100 pounds of it, and multiplied it in her head against 80 mouths she had not yet counted, but somehow already sensed, the way a woman raised in hunger can smell hunger coming before it arrives. Outside, the scarred man had not moved from the tree line. He stood with his hat low against the wind, watching the tent's small light flicker against the canvas, watching the shape of her shadow move slow and unhurried around the fire, unbothered by cold that had men twice her size complaining into their collars. He had seen men break under less. He had seen strong men buckle at a foreman's word. He turned the thought over slowly, the way he turned most things, and when he finally walked back toward the bunkhouse, he was already thinking of the crack in the oven, and what iron bands might hold, and how a thing did not have to be asked for, to be mended. The oven sat where the fire had left it, half buried in ash, and the black bones of what had been a cookhouse 6 weeks before it burned. Nothing remained standing but the chimney, and the iron itself, squat and stubborn, split down one flank like a bad tooth. She had found it her second morning in the gulch, walking the tailing's edge with her shawl pulled tight, and she had stood over it a long while before she understood that no one else wanted it. Ruined iron, ruined woman. The camp had decided both were past saving and moved on to matters that mattered more, which was survival, which was silver, which was everything that was not her. She dragged it herself the first day, inch by inch through frozen mud, until her hands blistered through her gloves, and she had to stop and breathe against the pain, the way she had learned to breathe against other pains, the kind that did not show on skin. No one offered to help. A boy watched from the assay office steps, thin and hollow-eyed, young enough that his ears still stuck out from beneath his cap, and he did not offer either, only watched, the way children watch weather they cannot yet name as dangerous. By the second night, the oven sat outside her tent, crack open to the sky, and she covered it with a scrap of canvas, as if that might keep the cold from finishing what the fire had started. She woke before light on the third morning, to find the canvas gone, and the crack packed tight with gray clay, bound top and bottom with 2 bands of iron, still warm from a forge fire lit somewhere in the dark hours, when decent men were sleeping. She stood over it a long time. She did not ask who. She already knew. That was the shape of him she was learning, a man who mended before he spoke, who fed a stove before he'd feed a sentence. She had heard the miners call him close-mouthed, had heard them say worse of his face, the burn scar pulling his jaw taut on one side, like a man perpetually about to argue and never quite doing it. She had not yet heard him say 10 words together. She built her first fire in the repaired oven that evening, and it held. The clay did not crack again, not that winter, not the next. She stood before it with her hands spread to the heat and felt something in her chest loosen that had been clenched since Missouri, since the wagon, since the husband who was 3 years dead, and the son who was 2 years buried beside him. She did not cry. She had not cried in some time. She only fed the fire and watched the light climb the crack that no longer ran clean through, and understood, without being told, that somewhere out past the tree line a man was watching too. The flour lasted her 4 days before she understood the arithmetic of it, standing over the sack with a tin cup, counting what 100 pounds meant against 80 mouths, and no wagons, and a pass already choked with snow that had not stopped falling since the day she arrived. She had baked for smaller numbers before, for a husband, for a son who ate like a bird and then did not eat at all, but she had never baked against a mountain. She began to stretch it that first week without telling anyone, the way a woman learns to stretch a marriage gone thin, quietly, so no one could accuse her of failing before she had truly tried. Cornmeal first, because there was cornmeal, forgotten in a barrel behind the assay office that no one claimed. Then potato peelings, dried near the stove until they went brittle as paper and ground fine between 2 stones she found near the tailings. She did not ask permission. She had learned that asking permission in this camp meant waiting for a man's convenience, and convenience was a thing men here did not extend to a widow with a cracked oven and a dead husband's name. The bread came out heavier than she liked, denser, with a bitterness in it from the peelings that she covered with what little salt she dared spend. She did not think it good, she thought it enough, which was a different thing entirely, and she had learned the difference the hard way, in Missouri, in the year the crops failed, and her son's ribs had shown through his shirt like the slats of a fence. She gave the first loaf away before she sold a single one. An old mule skinner took it from her hands, without flinching from her face, the way the others did, broke it open right there in the cold, steam rising off it into the gray morning, and 8 standing in front of God, and the whole shunning camp, as if daring the rest of them to say something about the widow's bread. Nobody did, not to his face. She watched him from the doorway of her tent, flowers still on her wrists, and understood that word would travel through a camp faster than any wagon ever could. By evening, 2 more men had found reasons to pass near her fire. By the following morning there were 4, standing at a careful distance, not speaking to her, only to each other, as if bread were something a man could want, without wanting anything else alongside it. She kept baking. She did not yet know what it would cost her, or what it would earn her, only that the oven held, and the fire held, and for the first time in a long while, so did she. The cold did not soften with the days, only sharpened, the way a blade sharpens against a stone, until it forgets it was ever dull. She rose before the light each morning, when the camp was still black and silent, except for the tin creak of the wind against the tailings, and she worked the dough by feel, because her fingers had long since stopped needing her eyes to know when it was ready. The oven cracked a little wider every day. She heard it in the way the heat leaked, in the way one corner of every loaf came out pale while the rest browned true, and she packed the fissure with river clay each evening, knowing it would not hold, knowing she had no iron to hold it even if she'd known how. She did not ask for help. She had learned, in the years since her husband's grave went unmarked because she could not afford the stone, that asking was its own kind of currency, and she had none left to spend. But on the 5th night, she woke to the sound of metal against metal, low and careful, coming from the lean-to where the oven sat. She lay still beneath her one blanket, listening, telling herself it was only the wind finding some loose sheet of tin. The sound went on a long while, tap and pause, and tap again, patient as a man setting a trap he meant to spring gently. She did not go out. She was afraid, not of the sound, but of what it might mean to be helped, and to have to find a way to carry that too. In the morning, the crack was banded in iron, packed tight with fresh clay gone the color of rust, and the heat no longer leaked from any corner. She stood before it a long moment with her palm flat against the warm cast iron, the way she might touch a horse to see if it had truly been gentled, and she said nothing to anyone, because there was no one to say it to. The boy who fetched her water saw her looking at it strange, and asked if the oven had always sat like that. She told him it had. She did not know yet why she lied, only that some things felt too new to speak of without breaking them. She saw the foreman only once that day, moving past the fire line with his shoulder set low against the wind, the scarred side of his face turned away from her as it always was, as if the burn were a debt he still meant to pay off in privacy. He did not look toward her tent. He did not need to. She understood, watching the careful way he walked, like a man who had learned that some kindnesses were only real if no one saw them given, that the mending had not come from luck, or from God, or from the camp deciding at last to forgive her. It had come from him. She woke before the 4th watch, when the cold came in under the tent flap like water finding a crack in a hull, and she lay still a long moment, listening to the camp breathe around her, the creak of frozen canvas, the far-off cough of a mule, the wind working at the tailings pile, as if it meant to carry the whole gray mountain of waste rock away by morning. Her hands ached before she moved them. They always did now. She flexed her fingers under the wool blanket, counting the small pains the way her mother had taught her to count blessings, because both arrived in the same order and neither could be argued with. She rose and dressed in the dark and went to the oven before she went to anything else, before the fire, before the water pail, because she needed to see it again in the gray pre-light, to be sure the seeing of it the day before had been real and not some trick of exhaustion. The iron bands sat where his hands had set them, tight and cold and honest. The clay had dried hard along the seam, packed so close she could not work a fingernail into the crack that had, 6 weeks ago, run clean through the belly of the thing, like a wound that would not close. She had cooked over that wound anyway, because a woman did not refuse the only oven she had on account of its scars. Now it had none. Now it only had his. She built the fire small at first, the way she always did, feeding it corn husk and pine scrap until it caught with a sound like a held breath finally let go, and she thought, not for the first time, that fire was the one thing in Blackwater Gulch that did not care whose hands fed it. It burned the same for the cursed as for the blessed. She had learned to trust that indifference. It was the closest thing to fairness the camp had ever shown her. By the time the gray light came fully over the ridge, she had the first batch rising under a cloth, and she stood in the tent flap with her arms folded against the cold, watching the camp wake in its slow, grudging way. Men emerging from canvas and timber like animals from a den, stamping, spitting, cursing the wind by name as though it were a foreman they could complain to. None of them looked at her tent. That had not changed, but she found she did not mind it this morning the way she had minded it the morning before, because she understood now that somewhere among those moving shapes was a man who had looked at her enough for both of them and had said nothing, and had meant everything, and had gone back to his work before the sun came up, so that no one, not even her, could call it a kindness to his face. The bread rose slower and cold like this, and she had learned to read its patience the way other women read scripture, by faith that the thing unseen was still working underneath the cloth. She ducked back into the tent to check it, lifting the corner just enough to see the pale dome swelling against the canvas, and she thought, not for the first time, that dough asked less of her than people did. It wanted only warmth and time. It did not require her to prove herself twice before it would rise. Outside, the camp's noise thickened into the ordinary business of morning: axes, the complaint of a mule, a man coughing the night's cold out of his chest. She heard boots pass close to her tent, slow down, and then continue on, and she did not look to see whose they were. She had stopped needing to know. It was enough now to notice the shape of a kindness without demanding its name attached. By mid-morning, 3 men came to her, flap with tin cups, held out like offerings at a shrine, asking after coffee, though they called it something else, some word meant to disguise that they were asking her for anything at all. She poured it without comment. One of them, a squat man with a red beard who had spat near her boots the week before, said nothing about that now. He only nodded once, quick, as though nodding cost him something he was not sure he could afford, and walked off with his cup steaming into the wind. She watched him go, and felt no triumph in it, only a kind of tiredness that came from carrying a debt no one intended to repay in words. At noon, she carried a loaf, still warm enough to fog the air above it, down toward the collapsed tunnel's mouth, where the timber crews were shoring up what remained of the old works. She had told herself she was bringing it for the crew in general, for the cold, for the labor, not for any one man among them. But when she saw him at the edge of the site, kneeling over a brace with his ruined jaw catching the gray light, something in her chest turned over slow and heavy, like dough itself. She did not call out. She only broke the loaf and set half of it on a flat stone near where he worked, within his reach but not so close as to seem a gift. Then she turned and walked back toward her tent without waiting to see if he noticed, because she had already learned that the noticing, when it came from him, always came in its own time, quiet as snowfall, and twice as certain to leave its mark before it melted away. The bread was gone by the time she reached her own doorway, though she had not looked back to see it taken. She knew only because the flat stone stood bare when she passed it again an hour later, carrying water, and because something in the set of the timber crew's shoulders had shifted, the way men's postures changed when they had eaten and did not wish to say so aloud. She did not ask. She had learned that asking cost more than it earned, out here, where a man's pride was rationed as carefully as flour. That evening, the wind came down off the ridge with a sound like something tearing, and she banked the coals in her oven twice, once for the heat, and once because her hands wanted the motion. She thought of his jaw catching the gray light. She thought of the 2 nights he had spent over her cracked iron with clay and wire, and no word of why. She did not let herself think further than that, because further than that was a country she had no map for, not since Missouri, not since the fever took her husband in a spring, so wet the ground would not hold his grave the first time they dug it. The boy came to her tent near dusk, stamping snow from his boots, his coat too thin for the season, and his cheeks raw with it. He was carrying an empty flour sack he meant to trade for kindling money, and he lingered at her fire longer than the trade required, the way he always did, watching her hands work the dough, as though the motion itself were a kind of sermon. Foreman ate his half, sitting on the rock, the boy said. not looking at her, poking at the coals with a stick he had no business holding so close to the flame. Didn't say nothing to nobody, just ate it slow, like he was making it last. She did not answer right away. She turned the dough, folded it, turned it again, the rhythm of it steadying something in her chest that had gone loose and uncertain at his words. "Men eat how they eat," she said finally. "Tells you nothing." "Tells you something," the boy said, and there was a stubbornness in it that reminded her, briefly and painfully, of her own son, dead 3 winters now, of the same fever that had taken his father. She did not correct the boy again. She only handed him a heel of bread from the morning's baking, still tough enough to need working with the teeth, and watched him eat it by her fire with the particular hunger of the very young and the very alone, and she thought, not for the first time, that the camp was fuller of orphans than anyone cared to count, grown men among them, wearing their loss like a coat too thin for the season, waiting for someone to notice the cold in them before they froze all the way through. The snow had thickened by the time the boy licked the last of the crumbs from his fingers, and she watched him go still for a moment, the way the young do when warmth and food together undo them faster than either alone. He did not thank her in words. He never did. He only nodded, once, and pulled his collar higher, and went back out into the white with his shoulders set against it, and she was left with the fire, and the dough, and the particular silence that came after someone left her tent. A silence that used to feel like relief, and now felt, more often than she wanted to admit, like absence. She worked the dough longer than it needed. It was a habit she had never broken, not since Missouri, not since the years when working dough had been the only thing that kept her hands from shaking with worry, over accounts that would not balance, and a husband who came home smelling of other men's whiskey. The motion asked nothing of her. It gave back exactly what she put into it, no more, no less, and there was a mercy in that kind of fairness she had found nowhere else in her life. Outside, the wind had picked up, worrying at the canvas walls with a sound like something testing for weakness. She banked the fire lower, mindful of the flour stores, mindful of the 11 weeks the pass had already stolen, and how many more it might yet take before wagons found their way through. She had begun rationing without telling anyone, cutting the loaves thinner, stretching the cornmeal further, watching the barrel of flour sink toward its bottom with the particular dread of a woman who had watched barrels empty before and knew what came after. She thought of the scarred man only once that evening, and only because the wind reminded her of the sound the fire had made the night he burned his hand testing the oven's heat before letting her use it, checking it the way a man checks ice before he lets a child walk on it. He had said nothing about the burn. He rarely said anything, but she had noticed, the way she noticed most things about him now, quietly, and without letting herself dwell on the noticing. The boy's words stayed with her longer than she wanted them to. Like he was making it last. She told herself it was nothing, that a hungry man ate slow because his stomach had learned caution, not because of anything she had baked into the bread beyond flour and salt and the sour starter she had carried wrapped in wool across 4 states. But the thought would not fully leave, and she found herself glancing toward the flap of her tent more than once that night, listening for a particular weight of footstep in the snow, though she could not have said, even to herself, why she was listening for it at all. He did not come that night. She told herself this was proper, even fitting, that a foreman had no business circling a widow's tent after dark, no matter how many loaves passed between them by day, and she banked her fire and lay listening to the wind test the canvas seams until she slept without meaning to. By morning, the cold had teeth. She woke to find the water bucket frozen solid through, a skin of ice thick enough that she had to break it with the flat of the axe before she could work it into the dough. Her hands ached before the sun cleared the ridge. She worked anyway, because 80 men did not care whose knuckles had split in the night, only whether the bread came at the hour it always came. And she had built her worth on that hour, the way another woman might have built it on a husband's name. The boy arrived before the first batch had risen, stamping snow from boots 2 sizes too large, borrowed or scavenged from a dead man's trunk, though she did not ask which. He carried a message this time instead of a request. The claim foreman wanted to know if she needed more clay for the oven seam, on account of the cold, working the iron bands loose faster than he'd reckoned. She said the seam held fine. The boy relayed this as though it were a matter requiring careful transport, and she watched him go with the particular seriousness of a courier who believed himself essential to something larger than a question about clay. The seam did not hold fine. She had known it wouldn't when she said it. A hairline had opened along the old crack sometime in the night, thin as a hair itself, letting a thread line of smoke curl out where no smoke should show, and she had packed it herself, with what clay she could spare, rather than send the boy back with the truth of it. She was not certain why. It was not pride, or not only pride. It was something closer to the reluctance of a woman who has learned that needing a thing from a man, even a small thing, opens a door she is not ready to walk through in either direction. He came near dusk instead, without the boy, without being asked, and knelt by the oven's base with the same unhurried patience he brought to everything, running 2 fingers along the seam until he found the gap she'd tried to hide. He did not remark on it. He only asked, quietly, whether she had more clay, and when she said she did not, he said he would bring some in the morning, and that was the whole of it. He stayed a moment longer than the errand required. She noticed. She always noticed, now, whether she let herself dwell on it or not. The light had gone the color of weak tea by the time he rose from his crouch, brushing clay dust from his knees with the flat of his palm, and she found herself measuring flour into the bowl with more care than the task required, as if precision in one thing might steady what felt unsteady in another. He did not leave right away. He stood near the tent flap, looking out at the tailings pile gone blue with evening, and she understood, without either of them saying it, that he was watching the smoke of other fires rise from the main camp, counting them perhaps, the way a man counts a thing he is responsible for, whether or not the responsibility was ever given to him outright. "Wind's turning," he said finally, not as conversation, but as fact, the kind of thing a man says when he has run out of reasons to stay and has not yet found one to leave. She said nothing, only nodded, and worked the dough with the heel of her hand, folding it over itself in the rhythm that had become as much a part of her as breathing. The starter jar sat near the oven's mouth, where the warmth would keep it lively, wrapped still in the same wool she had carried it in from Missouri, gone gray now with handling, and she thought, not for the first time, of how strange it was that the one thing she had refused to let go of, on the whole hard crossing, was the thing keeping 80 men fed, while the company's own stores sat frozen somewhere behind a wall of snow no wagon could cross. He left without further word, the way he always did. But at the flap, he paused and looked back at the oven's belly, where the new clay was drying to the color of old rust, and something in his face, not quite a smile, nothing so simple as that, settled there and then was gone. She did not sleep well that night, though the cold was no worse than any other, and toward morning she rose before the boy came and knelt where he had knelt, running her own fingers along the seam to see if the new work would hold. It did. She told herself that was the whole of her satisfaction, the soundness of the mend, and not the fact that he had come without asking, had known without being told, had looked at a crack in an old iron oven the way another man might look at something worth saving on its own account. The bread that morning rose higher than it had in a week, and Pete Ansell, first through the flap as always, said it smelled like something worth living for, and did not know how close his words came to true. The word spread the way heat spreads through iron, slow, then all at once. By the second week of the new year, the line at her flap started before the sky had properly lightened, men stamping their feet against the cold, breath rising in ragged clouds, and she learned to read them the way she had once read her husband's moods, who had slept, who hadn't, who had gotten a letter from home that lifted him, or one that hollowed him out. She fed them all the same. That was the one rule she kept without ever speaking it aloud. The bread did not know a man's history, did not care whether he had crossed himself when she passed 6 weeks before, did not remember who had called her the reason the mountain had opened its mouth and taken 4 lives into it. The flour did not stretch on its own. She had learned that first in Missouri, in leaner years than these, and now she taught her hands the lesson again, a measure of cornmeal here, the water from boiled potato peelings there, and when even that ran thin, she sent the boy up the slope with a hatchet to strip the soft inner bark from the pines, which she dried by the oven's heat and ground between two stones until her palms blistered and split at the creases. It did not taste of much. It tasted of effort, which she had come to think was its own kind of flavor, one that men who had never gone hungry could not name, but somehow recognized on the tongue. The foreman came less often now that the oven held, but he came. He brought a split of wood some mornings and set it by the flap without a word, as though the wood had simply arrived there on its own, as though no hand had carried it. She began to leave a heel of bread wrapped in cloth on the same spot, and neither of them spoke of the exchange, and neither of them stopped making it. The camp's ledger, which she had begun keeping in a cracked notebook, traded off a miner for 3 days' bread, grew thick with names and small sums, a coin here, a plug of tobacco there, an hour's labor hauling water when coin ran short. She had not meant to build a business. She had meant only to keep herself, and then the boy, and then, without quite deciding it, 80 men from starving in the white months, while the pass stayed choked with snow and no wagon came through it. But a business was what it had become, whether she named it so or not, and there were men in that camp who had begun to notice the shape of it long before she let herself see it plain. Men who counted things for a living and did not like what they counted. One of those men came to her door on a Tuesday in late January, when the drifts had climbed past the tent stakes and the sky held that flat white brightness that meant more snow before dark. He did not come for bread. He came with a ledger of his own, thin and official-looking, the kind of book that had never once been rained on, and he stood outside her flap stamping snow from boots that had not done a full day's labor in longer than she cared to guess. He introduced himself as the man who kept the company's accounts, and he said it the way some men said their rank in an army, as though the words alone should part a crowd. She invited him in because the cold demanded it, not the courtesy. He sat on the one good stool, the one Amos had planed smooth from a fallen fir, and he looked around at the oven with its iron bands, at the sacks of cornmeal, and the drying racks of pine bark flour she had learned to grind fine enough to stretch a loaf 2 days further than it had any right to stretch, and he wrote something in his own book without asking her leave. She watched him do it. She said nothing. He asked her, in a voice pitched for reasonableness, how much she was taking in a week. She told him, because there was no shame in the number and no sense hiding it. He wrote that down too, and then he asked how she came to be selling company flour on company land, and she reminded him, evenly, that the flour was hers, carried from Missouri, and what she'd stretched it with had come off her own back and Jubal's, foraged bark and boiled peelings, none of it drawn from any company store. He did not argue the point. He simply closed the book, the way a man closes a door he intends to open again later, and thanked her for her time with a courtesy that felt, in her chest, like the first cold water down the collar before a storm breaks in earnest. After he had gone, tracking snow back toward the company office at the center of camp, she stood a long while in the doorway with her arms folded over her apron, watching his shape shrink against the white. Jubal came around from behind the drying rack, where he'd been listening the whole while pretending not to. He counted the money, the boy said, not the bread. She did not answer him. But she went back to the ledger that night and read every entry twice, as though the numbers themselves might tell her what was coming, and outside the wind picked up off the tailings pile and rattled the stovepipe like something testing a door it had not yet decided to break down. Amos came in past dark, stamping snow from his boots at the threshold, and did not ask what the man from the company office had wanted. She told him anyway, because the telling of it was easier than carrying it alone through another night. He listened with his hat still in his hands, turning the brim slow between his fingers, the way he did when something needed thinking through before it needed saying. He'll try the plot next, he said finally. Not the flour, the ground under the oven. She had not thought of it that way, but she saw it now, plain as the crack he had once packed with clay and iron. A man like that did not care about bread. He cared about what the bread sat on, and who it made beholden to whom. She set 2 bowls of the potato peel stew on the table between them, and neither one ate for a moment, only sat with the steam rising and the wind still testing the stovepipe outside. "Let him try," she said, though her voice did not carry the certainty she wanted it to. He looked at her then, steady, the burn scar catching gold along his jaw in the lamplight. "You'd have 80 men behind you before he finished the sentence." She did not know if that was comfort or warning, and decided it did not matter which, because either way it was true, and truth was the only currency she had left, besides flour. They ate. The stew was thin but hot, and thin and hot had carried men through worse winters than this one, though none of them, she suspected, quite so strange. Jubal came by near 9 with an armful of split pine he had not been asked to bring, and set it by the stove without a word, the way he did most nights now, and lingered near the door longer than the cold required. He was watching them again. She could feel it, the particular quality of a boy's attention when he has decided 2 grown people are circling something they will not name. She did not send him out into it. The night was too sharp for pride. "You figure he'll come back with papers," Amos said, not quite a question. "Men like that always come back with papers," she said. "It's the only weapon they trust that doesn't need loading." He almost smiled at that. She saw the corner of his mouth move, the scar pulling faint and pale. And then he was serious again, turning his hat once more, before he set it on the peg by the door, as if he meant to stay a while yet, though the hour was late, and the cold outside had teeth in it. The stovepipe rattled again, harder this time, and none of them looked at it, though all 3, in their separate silences, were listening for the sound of something else, arriving with the wind. Boots, maybe, or the scrape of a sledge runner, or simply the first turning of a door that had not yet decided to break. It did not arrive that night. What arrived instead was silence of a particular kind, the kind that follows a held breath too long, so that by morning, the whole camp seemed to be waiting on something none of them could name, and the smoke from her chimney rose straight and thin into a sky the color of an old knife blade. She rose before light, as she always did, and worked the dough in the cold with hands that had long since stopped feeling the ache of it as anything but familiar. The boy came in with the wood before she called for him, stamping snow from his boots, saying nothing about the night before, though she saw him glance at the peg where the hat had hung, and then away again, quick, like a man pretending he had not seen a thing he had in fact seen entirely. The big man was gone by then, out checking the shoring on the number 2 drift, and she found she measured the morning by his absence the way she once measured it by the position of the sun, not with longing exactly, not yet, but with the plain accounting of a woman who had learned to notice when a thing was missing from a room. The men came for bread as they always did, in 2s and 3s, stamping and blowing on their hands, and she fed them, and took what they had to give, a twist of tobacco, a few coins gone soft at the edges, an hour's labor promised and later paid, and did not speak of papers or of company men, because there was nothing yet to speak of, only the waiting, and waiting was not a thing she intended to hand out for free. It was near midday when the old mule skinner came shuffling in, coughing into his sleeve, and lowered himself onto the bench by the stove with the particular carefulness of a man whose joints had begun keeping their own counsel. "Fevers in the camp?" he said, to no one and everyone. 2 of the Cornish boys down with it already. She set bread before him without being asked, and watched him eat it slower than usual, and did not like the sound in his chest when he swallowed, though she said nothing of that either, only refilled his cup and let him sit as long as he wished by her fire. The boy watched this too, she knew, watched the old man's hands shake faintly around the cup, watched her watch him, and said only, later, when the old man had gone, "He don't look right." She did not answer that directly. She only banked the fire a little higher than she needed to, and told the boy to fetch more water before the well iced over, and stood a long moment at the window after he had gone, looking out at the gray line of the sky where the pass should have been, waiting for something to break loose from it, snow, or riders, or an answer she was not yet ready to receive. The water froze in the bucket before the boy could bring it back a second time, and she heard him swearing at it under his breath, in the particular way of boys who had learned their curses from men who did not know they were listening. She did not correct him. There were larger things to mind than a boy's tongue. By morning, 3 more men had taken to their bedrolls, and by the following evening it was 5, and she began to understand the shape of what was coming, the way she understood weather, not by any single sign but by the accumulation of small wrongnesses, the way a man's cough sat too deep in him, the way another's eyes had gone glassy and far off, even as he tried to eat what she set before him. She kept the oven going longer into the night than she needed to, not for the bread, but for the warmth of it, and she made a thin broth from bones she had been saving for a better use, and carried it herself, bowl by bowl, to the tents where the fever had settled in. The scarred foreman came by on the second night of it, later than usual, and stood in her doorway with the snow still clinging white to his shoulders, before he shook it off. He did not ask how she fared. He only looked at the broth pot and at the line under her eyes, and said that he would split more wood before he went to check the shoring on the number 3 tunnel, and she said that would help, and neither of them said anything else, because there was nothing else that needed saying between them anymore. He split the wood. She heard the sound of it, long after she had gone back to her broth and her low fire, steady and unhurried, a man working through what could not be fixed by working. The old mule skinner did not come the next day, nor the day after, and when she sent the boy to look in on him, he came back with his face gone still, in a way she had not seen on him before, and said only that the old man was asking for her broth, not the doctor's tincture, and would not take anything else. She went herself that evening, carrying the pot wrapped in a blanket against the cold, and found him propped against his bedroll looking smaller than she remembered him, his big rough hands gone thin and pale over the quilt. He drank what she gave him, slow, and when he had finished he looked at her a long moment and said nothing about the fever, or the cold, or the past still buried under snow. He asked instead, in a voice gone thready, but not without its old dry humor, whether the foreman had come around to sense yet, or whether some men needed to be near dead themselves before they understood what was standing in front of them. She did not answer him right away. She set the pot down on the crate beside the bedroll and busied her hands with the blanket, tucking it closer around his shoulders, because it was easier to fuss over wool than to answer a question that old man had no right asking with his lungs so full of water. He did not let it go. He never had, not once in the 11 weeks she had known him, and she supposed a man dying slow in a canvas tent had earned the privilege of saying what he pleased. "He fixed my oven," she said finally. "That is not nothing, out here." "No," the old man agreed. "It is not nothing. It is also not everything, and you know the difference better than most, having buried a husband who gave you nothing at all and called it plenty." She did not answer that either. Outside the tent, the wind had come up again, worrying at the canvas walls the way it worried at everything in that camp, patient and without malice, simply doing what wind did in a place that offered no shelter from it. She could hear, faint under the wind, the sound of the foreman's low fire 2 tents over, the scrape of a shovel against frozen ground where he was widening a drainage cut so the meltwater in spring would not flood the lower tents. He worked at night more often than not, since the collapse. She had noticed that. She had noticed a great many things about him that she had not said aloud to anyone, not even the boy, who watched her with eyes too old for 17, and seemed to notice them anyway. "He does not court easy," she said, "because it seems safer than saying nothing." "No man worth having ever does," the old man said, and coughed, a long wet sound that left him gray in the lamplight, and she reached to steady him, though there was nothing to steady, only the sickness working its own slow collapse in him, the way the mountain had worked its collapse in the tunnel. When it passed, he lay back and closed his eyes, and for a moment she thought he had gone to sleep, but then he spoke again, quieter. "Tell him," he said, "that a man can spend so long holding up what is broken that he forgets there is a thing called mending. Tell him I said so. Tell him before I am not here to say it twice." She sat with him until the lamp burned low, and did not tell him she had already decided not to wait for him to say it once, let alone twice. And when she finally rose to go, the wind had eased, and the fire 2 tents over had gone quiet, banked for the night, and she stood a moment in the cold, looking toward it, before she turned back down the row, toward her own dark tent, and the flower that would not stretch itself. Pete Ansel died 3 days later, in the gray hour before the men went down to the shafts, and word of it moved through the camp the way cold moves through a wall no one has thought to chink, quietly, and everywhere at once. She heard it from Jubal, who came to the cookhouse with his hat already off, holding it against his chest like something he did not know what else to do with, and told her in a voice gone thin that the old mule skinner had not woken for his coffee. She did not weep in front of the boy. She set him to sifting cornmeal instead, because there was bread to make, and 80 men would still want feeding, whether or not the man who had been first to eat it was there to see the rest of the winter through, and grief, she had learned long before Blackwater Gulch, was a thing best carried while the hands stayed busy. But that night, after the last loaf had gone out and the tin plates had been scraped clean and stacked, she walked to the foreman's tent with a heel of bread wrapped in cloth, though she told herself it was only that he had not come to eat, and a man working double shifts on the pump needed feeding same as any other. He was outside splitting kindling by lamplight, his coat open despite the cold, his breath coming in long clouds. And when he saw her, he set the axe down against the stump and did not pick it up again. She told him what Pete had said, all of it, the mending and the broken and the twice he would not be there to say it. She watched his jaw work, watched the scar along it catch the lamplight and go pale, and she thought he might turn from her the way men turned from things too large to hold, but he only nodded once, slow, like a man agreeing to a debt he had already known he owed. "He told me something like it," he said, back before the tunnel. "He tell you to stop wasting daylight?" Something like it. A corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, more the memory of one. "I told him daylight wasn't the thing I was short on." She did not ask what he had meant, and he did not say, and the wind came up cold between them, and neither moved to end it, and somewhere down the row, a dog barked twice at nothing and went quiet, and the bread sat between them in its cloth, still warm, going cold slower than either of them wanted it to. Morning came gray and unhurried, the kind of light that seemed to have forgotten what it was for. She rose before it fully arrived, as she always did, and found the oven cold, and the ash still holding the shape of last night's fire, a pale skeleton that fell to nothing when she touched it with the poker. She built the new fire slow, feeding it splinters first, then the split cordwood he had stacked against the north wall, in a neat rick that had grown, week by week, without her asking him to grow it. The dough had risen through the night under its cloth, and she punched it down with the heel of her hand, and felt it sigh out its air, and thought, not for the first time, that bread was the only thing in her life that answered exactly as it was treated. Flour and water and time. No shortcuts, no mercy for haste. The line began forming before the smell of it reached the row of tents, the way it always did now. Men who knew the hour better than they knew scripture, standing with their coin or their tobacco twist or nothing at all, and she had stopped turning away the ones with nothing, though she kept a mark of it in the ledger, a small tally beside their names, not for shame, but for memory. Owed was not the same as forgiven, and she had learned the difference the hard way, in another life, with another man's debts. The boy came around back of the cookhouse with an armload of kindling too big for his frame, staggering under it, and she took half from him without a word, and he let her, which was its own kind of trust. "He's out at the number 4 shaft," the boy said, meaning the scarred man, though he did not need to say which he. "Corvin's up there too, talking loud." She did not stop kneading. Talking loud about what? Didn't hear all of it. Something about the timber count. He shifted his feet. Didn't sound like good talk. She looked toward the ridge where the shaft mouth sat black against the snow, and felt the old tightness come up under her ribs, the one that had lived there since a husband's voice first told her she was more trouble-fed than let-go hungry. She pushed the dough into its pan instead of answering it. "Bread'll want turning in an hour," she said. "Mind it." The boy nodded, solemn as a deacon, and she wiped her hands on her apron and went to see for herself what loud talk from Corvin meant this time, because loud talk from a man like that never came free, and she had learned to charge for it, same as everything else. The path up to the number 4 shaft had been beaten hard by boot traffic, ice packed into a shine that took the shape of every man who had climbed it before her, and she went up it the way she went up everything now, without hurry, without apology, the cold working its fingers under her shawl, and finding nothing there but resolve. She could hear them before she came around the last shoulder of rock, the foreman's voice low and even, the other man's pitched up into the register of someone who believed volume was the same thing as authority. Corvin stood with a ledger book open against his forearm, tapping a gloved finger at a column of figures, as though the number itself might apologize for what it said. The timber count. She understood enough of the camp's bones by now to know what a short timber count meant in a shaft that had already taken 4 men and half a jaw off the man standing across from him. It meant somebody had been skimming board feet off the manifest since autumn, selling the difference somewhere, and the shoring in the tunnels was thinner than the paper said it was. "I am not accusing you of anything," Corvin was saying, in the tone men use when accusation is precisely the thing being done. "I am asking you to certify the count as sound." "Can't certify what isn't." The investors in Denver do not need to know the particulars of every board. The men going down that shaft every morning might like to. She stopped at the edge of the clearing, half in the tree shadow, and did not announce herself. She had learned that too, that a woman standing still and silent heard more than one who stepped forward asking questions. Corvin's jaw worked. He had not seen her. He closed the ledger with a sound like a door. "You'll certify it, Teague, or I'll find a foreman who will." "Find him, then." The wind picked up a fine spray of snow off the shaft house roof and carried it between them, and for a moment, neither man moved, the way 2 dogs will hold still before one decides whether the fight is worth having. Then Corvin turned, saw her standing there in her shawl with flour still ground into the creases of her knuckles, and something in his face rearranged itself. Not quite alarm, but the recognition of a witness he had not accounted for. "Mrs. Callahan," he said, too smooth. "Come to bring the men their bread?" "Come to see what's worth shouting about on a morning this cold," she said, and did not look away from him, and he was the one, after a moment, who looked down first. Corvin recovered the way men like him always did, by reaching for the ledger again as though it were a shield and not a weapon. He tucked it under his arm and made a small business of brushing snow from his coat, buying himself the seconds a man needs to remember his own authority. "There's nothing to shout about," he said. "A matter of accounts. The company provided the plot. The company provided the flour, in the beginning, before your own stores ran short. It stands to reason the company holds an interest in what's built on its ground." "The flour I carried from Missouri in a wool blanket," she said. "The oven came out of ash the company let burn. The plot was the worst ground in camp, given to me because no one else would have it." She did not raise her voice. She had found, these past weeks, that a raised voice gave a man like Corvin something to push against, while a quiet one left him nothing to grip. If the company wants an interest in what's built there, the company can come stand at the door some morning at 4 and help me build the fire. A muscle moved along Amos's jaw, the scarred side, the way it did when he was working not to smile. Corvin's eyes went to him, then back to her, and there was a flicker in them, not quite shame, but something adjacent to it, the recognition a man gets when he has walked into a room expecting an argument and found instead a wall. "The men are fed," he said, as if trying the words for size. "That much I'll credit you." "They are fed because I feed them," she said, "not the company." He did not answer that. He looked instead toward the shaft house, where the new timbers stood pale and raw against the blackened old ones, and for a moment his face held something almost human, a man calculating, not cruelty, but cost, the arithmetic of a winter that had already cost him 4 lives and 11 weeks of silence from Denver. Then he settled his hat lower against the wind and said only, "We'll speak of this again when the pass clears," and walked off toward the office with the ledger still under his arm, his boots printing a neat, hurried line across the snow. She watched him go. Beside her, Amos let out a breath that fogged white and did not say anything for a while. "He'll try again," he said finally. "I expect he will. You ready for that?" She looked down at her own hands, chapped and floured, the knuckles that had kneaded 80 men's bread through the worst of a Colorado winter, and something settled in her chest that felt less like fear than like the flour itself. Patient, worked, waiting only for heat. "I've been ready since December," she said. The pass did not clear for 11 more days, and in that time, the camp settled into a waiting that felt different from the waiting of December. Then, the men had watched the snow and thought only of starving. Now they watched the office window, where a lamp burned late most nights, and thought of what a man with a ledger might do when he had time enough to think clearly again. Jubal noticed it first, because Jubal noticed most things before anyone said them aloud. He came by the cookhouse each evening to split kindling and stayed longer than the work required, watching the miners who lined up at the counter. Not for bread alone anymore, but to ask her, in low voices, whether it was true the company meant to take the plot. She never answered directly. She only said the bread was a nickel, same as always, and watched the worry travel from face to face like heat through iron. "They're scared," Jubal told her once, stacking wood with more care than the task needed. "Scared for you. They've got their own worries," she said. "Not the way they're scared for you." He did not look up when he said it, and she let the silence stand, rather than press him toward a truth she was not ready to hold. Amos came every evening now without pretense of errands, and stayed later than the wood carrying accounted for, and she had stopped remarking on it, the way a person stops remarking on weather that has become simply the season. He mended what wanted mending, a hinge, a bench leg, the door that had never hung quite true since the frame settled, and ate at her table after, and said little, and the little he said carried more weight than most men's speeches. One night he told her that Pete Ansell, before the fever took him, had said the plot belonged to her, the way a shaft belongs to the man who dug it, not the company that owned the paper. Said you'd earned title to it 11 times over before Corvin ever thought to write a claim. He turned his cup in his hands. Wanted you to know, somebody said it, even after. She did not answer for a while. The stove ticked as it cooled. Outside, the wind had dropped to something almost gentle, the kind of quiet that came before a thaw or before a storm, and there was no telling yet which this one carried. "Man like that," she said finally, "doesn't need thanking, just needs remembering. I remember him plenty. I know you do." Neither of them said more, and neither needed to. Down the row of tents, a lamp in the office window burned on, small and yellow against the dark, and she watched it the way a person watches a fire they know will have to be answered eventually, one way or another, before the pass ever cleared. The lamp burned in the office window for 3 more nights before the summons came, carried not by Corvin himself, but by a boy sent with a folded paper and instructions not to wait for an answer. She read it, standing in the doorway of the cookhouse with flour still on her hands, and she read it twice, though the second reading changed nothing in it. The paper called it an accounting. It asked her to bring her ledger, her scale, and her receipts to the office on the following morning, so that the company might, in the words written there, settle the question of proprietorship before the spring survey. She set the paper on the table and did not speak of it that night, though he saw it there when he came in with the wood, and he read it standing the way she had, and set it back down the same way, careful, as though it were something that might go off if handled wrong. "He means to take it in the daylight this time," he said. "Where men can see him do it fair." "He means to take it where men can see him win," she said. "There's a difference." The next morning came clear and hard, the kind of cold that made the snow creak instead of crunch, and word had already moved through the camp the way word always did, faster than any man could carry it on foot. By the time she walked the path to the office, there were men standing along it who had no reason to be standing there at that hour, men off shift and men who should have been sleeping, arranged as though by accident, along the route between the cookhouse and the company door. Jubal was among them, not looking at her directly, pretending an interest in the state of his boots. The old mule skinner's grave was somewhere past the tailings, unmarked yet, waiting on a stone that hadn't come, and she thought of him without meaning to, the way his voice had sounded saying she'd earned the plot 11 times over. Amos walked beside her the whole way, not touching her, not needing to. His shoulder was there if she leaned toward it, and he did not look at the men lining the path any more than she did, though she suspected he had counted them the same way she had, without seeming to count at all. The office door stood closed when they reached it, lamp still burning behind the glass, though the sun was well up now, as if someone inside had forgotten to put it out, or hadn't wanted to. She knocked once, and did not wait long before pushing it open herself. The man behind the desk did not rise. He had a paper in front of him already, and for a moment she thought he had drafted it in the night, some new claim dressed up in finer words than the last. He turned it toward her without a greeting, and she saw her own name at the top, written in a clerk's careful hand. Not the company's name above it, not beneath it, but hers alone, plain as a nail driven straight. He said the words about back payment before she could ask, said them fast, as though speed might make them sound like his idea. Owed wages, recovered stores, a structure built on company ground but by a labor the company had never paid for and could not, in good conscience, continue to withhold. He did not look at her while he said it. He looked at the window, where the shapes of men were visible through the frost, not moving, only standing, the way frost itself stands on a pane until the sun decides otherwise. She read the paper twice. Then she signed it, and did not thank him, because there was nothing in it that deserved thanks, only what the 11 weeks had already earned, set down at last in ink instead of flour. Outside, the men did not cheer. They only shifted, the way a held breath shifts when it is finally let out, and one by one went back to whatever they had been pretending to do before she came out the door. Jubal was the last to leave, and he looked at her then, openly, something in his face she did not have a word for and did not try to find one. The stone for the mule skinner's grave came in April, hauled up with the first wagon through the reopened pass, and Amos set it himself, without being asked, the way he had done most things that mattered. Spring came slow to Blackwater Gulch, the way it always did at that altitude, snow retreating in patches, the tailings pile going from white to gray to the color it had always been underneath. The cookhouse stood rebuilt by June, wider than before. The oven, cracked, mended, cracked again, mended again, set into a wall of new stone. He carried wood for it every evening whether it was needed or not, and ate at her table every night, and neither of them called it anything, because it did not need calling. Years later, men who had been boys that winter would tell it differently, depending on who was listening. Some said she saved the camp, some said he saved her, and a few, the ones who had actually stood in the cold that morning, said only that a debt had come due, and been paid, and that was the whole of it, and enough.